hey, you come to us. This is your chance to get revenge on the team that wouldn't sign you again.
But also, it's an also opportunity to be team favorite along with Julio Rodriguez, right?
Well, hello, everyone. This is another weekly podcast of Rooftop Sports, hereby joined by my good friend Steve. And it's been a long time, Steve. And how have you been doing?
That's a good question. I've been okay. Still trying to get over this chest cold, but it makes it hard because we're in the dead of winter here in the Great Lakes area. So it has a tendency to linger, but we're fighting. We're hanging in there. I really wish it would stop snowing, but that's what happens when you move to a Great Lakes state. These things happen.
More like the Midwest kind of stuff. And I always complain about snow in Washington, but it's definitely more of a rarity.
By the way, I would take Western Washington's winters right now because, yes, it snows in the Seattle area. We all know that. And it's gotten worse over the last 15, 20 years. I remember there was a time where we would get like maybe 3 inches, and that would be like a good snowfall for the Puget Sound area. And then it seems like we've had like more and more and more snow accumulation over the last 15 to 20 years in the Puget Sound area. But that being said, you get like a big snowfall, then it'll freeze for a couple days, but then it thaws, and then you'll go like a month and a half without snow, right? Here, it just snows.
It just keeps going.
It just keeps going, and you're just like, all right, that was fun. Now let's just move on to the next, so I don't have to drive in snow. It's crazy.
The biggest advantage of Washington, because one thing I've noticed is when it snows, there is an advantage. Nobody drives.
Right. You know what blows my mind? You know what blows my mind out here in Michigan? It snows every winter, right? And it snows hard and it snows a lot. And a lot of native Michiganders that have been here for decades drive like they've never seen snow on the road, right? It's like, this is like something that everybody should be accustomed to out here. Right? You were born and bred in the Midwest. There's going to be a lot of snow. So my question is why do you drive like, a defensive soccer mom with a baby on board sticker in the back of your car, right? It's like, my whole thing is like when you drive slow, right? I've noticed this, like if you just drive the speed limit, you're going to be okay. You're going to be able to accelerate, decelerate, whatever the case may be, and you'll be fine. But when you drive slow as you're being defensive, then you see a lot of slipping and sliding on the road. And it boggles my mind how native Michiganders simply cannot handle the snow on the road. It's like when the flakes start falling, man, these people freak out. And I don't know, man, it boggles my mind.
I wouldn't want to know why it's being such a problem either. But we've got a lot of, I don't even know if it's a lot of Mariners baseball at this point. I think this is just going to be a lot of making up stuff out of my butt because Mariners are literally giving us nothing to even.
Nope.
They're almost nothing giving us to complain about at this point.
Nope.
But we do.
Nope.
But
yeah, it's interesting, right?
Yeah.
I was going to say, because, we every single offseason, when it comes to the Christmas time, we usually get something like within 48 hours of Christmas Day. It's like that little gift that the Mariners always give the fan base. Last year, I think it was Mitch Garver, and the year before, I think there was something before Christmas.
Oscar.
Yeah, there you go. There was always something before Christmas, and it always kind of propelled, the fan base into the new year. We didn't get that this year. We didn't even get anything over the New Year's as well, either, except for a bunch of scrap heap bullpen arms. And it's a very disappointing season. Here's the thing. Going into it, we knew that the Mariners were not going to be active in free agency, so we already knew that anyway. But I didn't think it was going to be this, where it's like crickets.
It has literally been crickets. And before we get into more cricket-like Mariners offseason, let's talk about my beloved sponsor, SeatGeek, who has done me quite a bit for the last year, but NFL playoffs is going on. I know the Seahawks aren't in it, but doesn't mean that there is no opportunities to watch. Yeah, there's an opportunity to watch the Lions. And if you would like to save $20, use that SeatGeek promo code RoofTopSports so you can save $20 to get at least a decent meal, because we all know how expensive everything is at a stadium. So take advantage of that so you can get your NFL playoff experience. Now into Mariners baseball. In terms of moves, they technically have made moves.
Yep.
And here are the 4 moves, and they pretty much have been done all this year. So at least they have fulfilled, if they had a New Year's resolution of making a move, at least they did, I guess. But here's what it is. Mariners claimed Tyler J off waivers from the Milwaukee Brewers. Then they claimed Hagen Danner off the Toronto Blue Jays, the struggling Toronto Blue Jays. Signed free agent Josh Fleming to a minor league contract. And signed free agent Dylan File also to a minor league contract. That is all the moves that they have done, unless you want to count all of the non-tendering moves where they got rid of Josh Rojas and Austin Voth. But aside from that, no moves have been done. And at this point, we're at January 13th as of this video, and they haven't really made any moves to really give the fan base and the Mariners any kind of hope. While meanwhile, we're watching Houston at least reload around the fact that they had to get rid of Kyle Tucker in a trade. They have at least reloaded on that. They got Christian Walker, which the Mariners were rumored to get. And then we're watching the homeless Sacramento A's even make moves. They even made an extension to Brent Rooker, and they got Luis Severino. So we're watching, while the Mariners are just sitting on their butts doing nothing, and not even much Jerry DePoto is really saying anything, or Hollander, or John Stanton, we're watching our entire division pretty much compete against us. And at this rate, I don't even know if I think Mariners will be lucky to even get second place in the division at this point, or even third.
Yeah. I mean, it doesn't excite the fan base whatsoever to see, your division rivals get better, while, the Mariners are, sticking by their tried and true. We're the best pitching team in baseball. Okay, that's great, but that's only 50% of the equation. You actually have to score runs in order to protect leads, which is what where your pitching plays a huge part. But I think, especially with some of these arms that they've signed, it's the Mariner pitching machine, that has brought the likes of Colin Snyder and Drew Steckenrider and Paul Sewald, and some of these guys that they bought off the scrap heap have been able to identify a couple pitches that they have in their arsenal, and just double down on some of these strengths and be able to turn otherwise shaky bullpen arms into assets. And I would like to think that would be the case with guys like Tyler J, who last year, I think he only had 2 innings for the Brewers, 3 innings for the Mets. Had some innings in AAA with Milwaukee and New York. It did a little bit better with the Mets AAA than he did with the Brewers. But that being said, that is what the Mariners needed. They needed to fortify some of their bullpen spots. Last year, we saw that time and time again, where the Mariners had trouble holding leads, protecting leads. And so this seems to be the tried and true of what, the Mariners are known for. So I guess in that standpoint, I think you can say, okay, well, you can understand exactly what they're doing. That being said, though, they're still neglecting the holes on their, on their team. Like right now, they don't have anybody to play second base. Right now, they don't have anybody to play third base. Are you comfortable in right field with Victor Robles? Yeah, playing right field, and it's like, you look at what's going on in your division. Now, you obviously are not going to build your team based on what your division opponents are doing. You're going to stick with your philosophy, understood. But that being said, though, the idea is to win this division. And technically speaking, yes, the window is still open. I don't think Mariner fans will look at it and say that it's going to happen for us this year. But that being said, technically it's still open. So that being said, you're going to have to figure out a way to improve. I know that they, they just settled with Randy Arozarena on arbitration, which is good. They got Arozarena in cheaper than what was supposed to be expected. Okay, good for you. But that being said, you're still going to need one more bat in this lineup that it's going to take a little pressure off both Julio Rodriguez and Randy Arozarena. You're still going to have you're still one bat short. Ideally, that you would like that to be at third base, maybe at first base. I understand that's not going to be via free agency. Okay, fine. So it's going to have to come via trade. So when is that move going to happen? Or is that move going to happen? You know?
Well, you made some really good points. I like that you brought up that all those holes, and I wanted to talk about the possibilities of Mariners signing maybe a couple bullpen arms, very familiar ones. But here's a picture that I saw on Twitter X, and I thought it was very clever. So for catcher, Cal Raleigh. I mean, who else, right? And then at least the ones that are filled, like J.P. Crawford, but that's concerning. Randy Arozarena, I like him, but I don't like it when he steps back on a strike and throws a bat and gets Julio doubled up. Julio Rodriguez at center field, like I think we both agreed before that Julio is not a number one, he's a number two. Victor Robles. Now, this text was kind of funny. It goes, until he regresses or gets hurt, because you know what will happen. He was like, yeah, we have Robles, but this also could happen. And here's the rest. First base, who? Second base, what? Third base, I don't know. And first pitchers, literally the best rotation in baseball. How are we bleeping this up? It goes all the way back to 1990s, had the best, most historic offense in all of baseball. We had like 3 or 4 future Hall of Famers in one lineup, and we messed that up. 2001 had Ichiro and the 2001 mojo. Granted, got a little bit lucky, but whatever. They screwed that up. The Robinson Cano, Felix Hernandez, Kyle Seager years, they screwed that up, and it seems that history is repeating itself. And the only highlight so far of this entire offseason is that the Mariners were able to avoid arbitration and negotiate for more team-friendly contracts of Randy Arozarena, Logan Gilbert, George Kirby, Cal Raleigh, and Trent Thornton. But the concerns that I do have is how long is this going to last? Because eventually Logan's going to be due for a new contract. Arozarena is going to want a new contract. George Kirby for sure wants a new contract. What about Cal Raleigh? Yes, he doesn't have Scott Boras, but he still wants a new contract. So how long could these guys tolerate just being like, okay, yeah, we can settle for this. I don't need that contract yet, but it's gonna happen. And maybe money may not even be the problem anymore. It's gonna be a problem if, do they even want to be part of this team? Do they want to be part of this so-called now losing culture that even Teoscar Hernandez, because remember, he was like, oh yeah, I don't really like T-Mobile Park that much. I think it was a problem. And then he finally spilled the beans and go, no. The problem is team culture. It was just weird. And leadership is trash. Like, no one's going to say that T-Mobile Park is the reason, but I'm going off topic, but I am so sick and tired of people, including content creators of the Mariners community, trying to say that T-Mobile Park is a problem. I mean, if it was a problem, then let's ask the 2001 Mariners. Let's ask even the 2016 team that still hit 200 home runs with Nelson Cruz and Cano hitting nearly 40 home runs on each of them. I think Cruz hit 40 still, but I don't like these excuses.
Right. And, and that was one of the reasons why I was actually quite happy to see Scott Service go, because, when you looked around the diamond, there was no excuse for the way that the team was, performing. Even with certain injuries, that there's still enough talent out there to win ball games. So something had to have, something behind the scenes had to have been happening, where I wouldn't say that they were, players were mailing in, but they certainly weren't playing their best. And I would like to think that, leadership was an issue. So now we have new leadership. Okay, great. But the reality is, and this isn't just baseball. This is also a sports issue, right? So it's called your willingness to compete, your ambition, and players want to play for teams that have ambitious goals, right? Certain players would be willing to go to Milwaukee or Minnesota because they compete. Now, granted, they don't have big budgets, but they'd be willing to go to those cities because every single year they put together competent rosters. They know exactly where they're at, where they'll be competing. They know exactly what's expected of them. So they come to the ballpark ready to play every single day. And even in a pinch come trading deadline, they're still going to make moves, especially if they're in it. Perfect example is Milwaukee. that team even with small budgets still figures out ways to win, right? So there's certain dichotomy when it comes to ambition, and the question is for the Seattle Mariners is what is their ambition, right? Because this is actually a very wealthy team, right? They are in a market with no other competitors as far as baseball goes. The nearest competitor to them is in the Bay Area with the San Francisco Giants, and then all the way to the east with the Colorado Rockies and the Minnesota Twins, etc. Right? So they're in an area of the country with no competition to their sporting dollar. They print money every single year. At least 2 million fans come through the turnstiles. They have a very lucrative national TV contract, and they own their own RSN, which I would probably assume within the next year or so, I would probably assume they're going to go to some type of streaming service off their own website, which would make a lot of sense, considering RoofTopSports is almost done with. So that's going to be rectified, and they're going to end up making money off that as well too. So the reality is, like, this team, if they wanted to, and I keep saying this, if they wanted to, they could spend dollar for dollar with the LA Dodgers, the New York Yankees, the New York Mets. If they wanted to, they could. John Stanton chooses not to, and that's fine because he hired a guy in Jerry DiPoto who sold him on a vision of developing, having a team philosophy of draft, develop, and trade. That is what he sold John Stanton on. Okay, great. And we saw that in the early part of his tenure. We saw the ambition, and then we broke the playoff curse. Okay, great. But since that point, we have seen very little to no ambition. And that's the biggest problem. So if you're asking, like, if you're Logan Gilbert, if you're George Kirby, if you're Cal Raleigh, why, and you've seen this since 2022, since we've been in the playoffs, we've had 2 seasons of meh and even worse. What is it that the Mariners can offer that makes you believe that you are going to be in the playoffs every single year? What is it? When every single offseason, this is what we see.
There's nothing absolutely nothing.
Right. These guys want to win. These guys want to win. And it's like, like the funny thing is, like, do you remember that movie Moneyball with Brad Pitt? And where Brad Pitt goes to an owners, he said, "I'm not asking for hundreds of millions of dollars. I'm just asking for a little bit of help, and I'll give you that ring
too."
And that's exactly what we're at. We're not asking for Shohei Ohtani. We're asking for just enough where we can bring in competent veterans that are still productive to put around Randy Arozarena and Julio Rodriguez, and just put a good collective of young and veteran together, and allow this pitching staff to pitch with leads instead of trying to protect a 1-1 tie in the 7th goddamn inning. You know what I mean? Like, it's like, we're not asking for the moon and the stars. We're just asking for a little bit that's going to be able to take pressure off certain areas. And this team would probably be in the playoffs, but unfortunately we're not getting that. And what's even disheartening is the fact that the draft, develop, and trade isn't even a thing anymore, because we have not seen the trade aspect of it. We've drafted and developed well, we just haven't traded. And it's like, what are we waiting for? Are we really waiting for 2029? Are we waiting for the next Yordan Alvarez to make his major league debut? It's like, sometimes you have bullets in your gun for a reason, so you might as well fire them. And it's like, if you draft and develop that well, you're going to be able to replace those prospects.
They're about to by the end of this month, when they get, I think they're getting a new Venezuelan kid. I got to look up and see what's his ass, whatever his name is. Mariners new prospect.
Yeah, and it's the word, and that's, as a Mariners fans, that's the most disheartening, is because it's a lack of ambition, knowing that you have one of the best rotations that you've ever had in team history, and this team is like struggling to be 5 games over 500.
The projected prospect is to be, one of them is to be Kendry Martinez. He is going to be one of those top prospects. He is expected to be a top 15 in the class. Trying to see what his position is, though. But besides the point, and also, I can't even say his name. I'm going to say it wrong, but it's going to be Jorge Bautista, also heading to Seattle. So the Mariners do have prospects, which they can easily make up for.
Yeah.
Like, if we got rid of the last Montez, which I'm on the edge of not doing because of the whole Jordan Alvarez, I'm one of those fools. Felding Celestine, Colt Emerson, like you said, everyone should be up for grabs. Now, the only one I might hold is Cole Young, just to see if he's getting close to major league level anyway.
Colt Emerson, Cole Young, okay, cool guys that that are getting close. That's one thing, Britt. Like the Emerson Hancocks of the world. Some of these guys, then it's like, listen, this has always been a thing with Major League Baseball. Prospects are always meant to be traded. Like, don't get me wrong. Like, you want to keep the guys that you think that, are going to have an impact to your future, of course. Yeah. But that being said, guys that are like 2028, 2029, 2030 ETA, and it's like, yeah, they're going to be good someday, maybe. But if you can sell high on their upside, and it means that you can bring in a guy who's maybe in his second or third year, who also has a projected upside, and it gives you that flexibility because they got club control, and you can plug him in at third base or second base or plug him into the outfield, do it. Because if you draft and develop well, you're going to be able to replace him.
Yeah, because that was and everyone's probably, I think a lot of Mariner fans or even people like me, maybe some of us are thinking about, well, we traded David Ortiz to get Dave Hollins in '96. We traded to get Heathcliff Slocum, and that cost us Veritek and Derek Lowe. But the difference is they didn't have a backup plan, and their farm system wasn't exactly as prominent as it is now.
But who cares that you traded David Ortiz? Because we had Edgar Martinez for like another 8 more years, right? We traded Jason Veritek, but we had Dan Wilson for like another 8 more years. And like, that's the thing. It's like with Harry Ford. It's like, we have Cal Raleigh, right? And the chances are pretty good. I would say that I would give it an 80% chance that he's going to re-sign anyways. The Mariners are going to figure it out and re-sign him, and everybody's going to be happy. And it's like, okay, so it's like, if you're Harry Ford, your future is going to be at, like, if you stay in the organization, it's going to be at first base or DH, most likely DH. Backup catcher, DH. Okay, great. But that being said, if you can sell him on his upside into an organization that's shaky at catcher, and it allows you to bring that, like, for instance, I'll give you a good example. If you're able to trade him to Tampa Bay, Mariners and Tampa Bay have a good trading relationship, right? And the last thing, and I do believe that, there's, that upside is still going to be able to sell. And if it allows you to bring back their third baseman that you can plug in right now on opening day, and you have that position out covered for at least 3 seasons, why wouldn't you? Why wouldn't you send them some prospects that are going to be able that Tampa develops also incredibly well too, and you trade them a couple top prospects at positions of need, and you're going to be able to fill a position of need yourself. It's a win-win for both teams, and it's all good because this June you have another draft, and you're going to be able to replace those guys. And it's like, your minor league system is not going to take a hit. Two things I don't understand. Number one, I don't understand this prospect mania that we're now in, which was never a thing prior to 2016. Now all of a sudden it's like, having a top-rated farm system is a must if you're a Major League Baseball team. I've never understood that. But also, number two, the idea that prospects are untouchable. Like, you're insane if you think prospects are untouchable. Because the reality is, if you're a good drafting and developing team, the goal should still be to win a World Series. And you're supposed to use those prospects in order to make your Major League roster better. Yes, you can keep the Cole Youngs and the Colt Emersons of the world. Okay, fine. But the guys that are 2028, 2029, 2030 that have immense upsides, if you can turn that into Tampa's third baseman. Why am I
I'll look it up.
Blanking us. Why I can't. Maybe he got traded last deadline.
Well, Yandy Diaz is still on that team. He's an
Yandy
option
Diaz.
now.
Yeah, Yandy Diaz. Thank you very much.
Isaac Paredes, but I think he's already he's on Houston.
There you go. Yeah, Isaac Paredes. Thank you. I'm sorry.
But he's on Houston
Yandy
anyway.
Diaz. You get what I'm saying? Yeah. It was Yandy Diaz I was thinking about.
Brandon Lowe.
Yeah, Brandon Lowe. There you go. It's like there's a lot of teams out there that would foam at the mouth to have a couple of these prospects, and it's like the greatest thing about the Mariners' position is that, there's a lot of creativity out there to be had. All they have to do is pick up the phone. You know what I mean? And if it means that you're trading one of your starters, you're going to get a starter back in return as well too. Like, you're going to get the guy that you want, whether he be a first or second year guy that you can plug, because the Mariners are always going to go for club control to begin with anyways. But you might be able to squeeze out a good pitching prospect as well too. You know what I mean? And then you have the Emerson Hancocks of the world that you can plug into your fifth spot in your rotation.
Yeah, and having Emerson Hancock as your fifth guy isn't the worst thing in the world. Like, when he pitched, it's not like the team was any bad. He wasn't like great, but he also wasn't a disaster either.
Yeah, he's a good insurance policy to have.
Most teams, a lot of teams, I think would have killed to have an Emerson Hancock. Like the Dodgers, I think would take the likes of him, maybe as their fifth guy for sure. Now,
to be a AAA, to be your sixth starter in AAA, 100%. I would probably assume every major league team would like to have that luxury.
Yeah, exactly. And I think we've gone over as much as we could about, oh my God, Mariners should be making moves. But I do have maybe 3 players in mind. There are former Mariners, but maybe let's just make this a yes or no. Should they do it? Should they not?
Sure.
I'll just give you names. First one, Ty France, because first base is vacant unless Luke Raley can hit against lefties. But let's say the market is dying on him. Do you give him a shot for at least a spring training invite, for example?
Yeah, actually, because Ty France isn't going to command a huge salary. I would be surprised if he got more than $4 million. I think he's kind of in that price range. You know him. The one thing that I can say about Ty France is he's not coming back into a Scott Service offense. So it's going to be a little bit different. New hitting coaches, new hitting philosophy, which it should be tailored to hitting fastballs again, which wasn't necessarily Scott Service's strong suit. But I will say that it wouldn't be the worst idea in the world as far as, a retread. He gives you cover at first base. He can give you cover at DH as well too. If you want to platoon first base with Luke Raley, I don't have a problem. By the way, I don't have a problem with Luke Raley playing first base every day. I actually think he's one of the better left-handed hitters in our lineup. And I actually think that Luke Raley is an above average player. I think he's one of our best players, and I think he should be playing every single day. And if the Mariners figure out a way to fill second and third base, I'd be okay with Luke Raley at first base. Now, you're going to give yourself some cover at the DH position, whether that be Mitch Garver versus lefties, whatever the case may be, or you can bring in a guy like Justin Turner back again for one more year on a cheap deal, or maybe even Ty France. That would, Ty France wouldn't be the worst idea in the world because it's not going to cost you an arm and a leg, and it makes sense too because it does rectify the first base and DH position quite well from a left-handed pitching perspective.
What I saw with Ty France was in Seattle he struggled. First 2 seasons he was great, but then the last 2 seasons something just happened. I think Scott Service and that geek offensive coordinator was like, oh yeah, start hitting home runs. And how did that go? Not good. Then he got cut. Then he went to Cincinnati under David Bell, who unfortunately is not the manager there anymore. But we saw huge improvements out of Ty France. He was actually one of their more effective hitters in the second half. So you would have to imagine that if he goes to the Mariners, back to the Mariners with Dan Wilson and Kevin Scheitzer, can't even say his name right.
Kevin Scheitzer.
You have to imagine that, knock on wood, he can't do any worse than he's got to do better than a Scott Service Ty France. I mean, there's got to be a difference when you have a Dan Wilson run Ty France.
Well, if you notice the difference between year 1 and year 2 and year 3 and year 4 of Ty France was that in year 1 and year 2, he was swinging early on fastballs. Like he was actually taking advantage of some of the pitches that he was seeing. And then for whatever reason, they wanted, I don't know if it was the Mariners or Ty France himself, being at a position that requires power, that he kind of tried to develop into a pull side power hitting first baseman, except the fact that he wasn't getting the fastball anymore, and pitchers were working around him. and he wasn't able to capitalize on the off-speed pitches. He wasn't getting anything out of the plate, and he struggled. And there were times where I thought that Ty was being a little bit more aggressive and taking advantage of early count fastballs, but it didn't last, and unfortunately he got cut. But when he goes to Cincinnati, what ended up happening in Cincinnati? He started again turning on first pitch, second pitch fastballs, right? So he started getting back to what made him, what made him good. I thought he finished the season unbelievably well when he went to Cincinnati, and it kind of raised his stock a little bit. The question is whether or not that there's going to be a market for him. The other question is whether or not he's still bitter about getting cut from Seattle. Right? So is there still a door open for him in Seattle? And would he walk through that door knowing that it's not Scott Service, it is Dan Wilson? But the question is whether that bridge has been burned between him and Jerry Dipoto. That's the question to be asked. But it's not the worst idea in the world. If it were me, I would give him a call and see if there's any interest. And if not, there's not. But it does help. Having Ty France wouldn't be the worst thing.
Let's say it's more of a last resort kind of thing. Now, here are two players before we move on to the next. Paul Sewald and Kendall Graveman. Both were in similar situations. They were both traded away during contention. And at least one of them said something about the team. That was Paul Sewald. He criticized the management. And Kendall Graveman, well, he had Kyle Seager to criticize the management on his behalf anyway. But they're both free agents. Sewald had a struggling season. Kendall Graveman's coming off of injury. But for the sake of depth, because as long as Matt Brash is healthy, which I hope he is, I don't think he is.
I think Brash will be back in May and June, so he's not going to start. He's not going to start the season right away, so you're going to have that need in the bullpen. The other question is the guy that we got from Chicago last year in a trade, the White Sox.
He was Gregory Santos.
There you go.
That's going to be one, and then Munoz.
And Munoz, right? And we already know that Munoz. I don't care what anybody says. He's not a lockdown closer. He's not a guy that you can rely. At least I don't feel that way. So at the back end, at least with a guy like Paul Sewald, it fits because you have a position of need. But that's not the Mariners' MO, right? And that's the biggest problem. Like with a guy like Kendall Graveman, you might be able to get like on a one year, $1 million deal. An invite to spring training, and if he makes the team, that's like 1.4, so it's not like the worst. And he's familiar with it. The question about Paul Sewald is the price tag, right? So is he in the 6 to 8? Because the Mariners are not going to do that, right? The Mariners will not pay Paul Sewald $6 to $8 million. Now, if they can get him like on a 2 to 4, you know what I mean? That might make sense, but then again, just the same thing with Ty France. Like, is that bridge burned because he did criticize Mariner management? Now, was that Jerry Dipoto, Justin Hollander, or was that Scott Service, right? Because if it was really just Scott Service, then maybe it's different now. He's not here anymore, so that coaching staff is gone. So the question is whether or not that can be rectified. Having Paul Sewald back would be great. I thought trading Paul Sewald when they did was a misstep, but it is what it is. To me, it all comes down to dollars and cents with him. The only thing with Kendall Graveman is health, right? Because when he left for Houston, he dealt with some major injury issues, and the question is whether or not he's healthy, number one, and number two, how effective is he going to be able to be?
Questions remain to be seen, but
by the way, which of the two would you like to see back in Seattle? Do you think either or are fit?
I would like Ty France and Paul Sewald if we come down to a last resort, and that is if the Mariners can't come up with any of these following four players that I do want to talk about in the next part of this segment. But yeah, Ty France and Paul Sewald only if it's like you have no other choice, you sat your butt around, and they happen to be available. They're very undervalued. I'd be open to it because I'd rather make that kind of a move than absolutely not, because I don't think any Mariners fan would believe that Mariners can be a playoff team with Ryan Bliss at second base and Dylan Moore as your third baseman. Right. I think that's absolutely insane to think. Even Dylan Moore in like his prime, like 21 Dylan Moore, I still wouldn't do that. Or 2020 Dylan Moore was actually his prime. Still not doing that.
Right. And I don't think either Paul Sewald or
Ty France.
not Ty France.
Kendall Graveman.
Thank you. Kendall Graveman are going to be in a Mariner uniform in 2025 because they did, they did just claim Tyler J and Hagen Danner and Josh Fleming and Dylan File off waivers. And that's the Mariner MO, right? So if even one of those guys hits in the bullpen, I think Dylan File is the starter actually. But, if one of those guys actually hits, because, that's the Mariner MO, right? They're going to lock down on the strengths of each individual pitcher, and they're going to put them in positions to try to succeed. And, they have success. Drew Steckenrider, Colin Snyder, Paul Sewald. So they have been able to take reclamation projects on and get value out of them, right? So if any one of those guys hits, that's going to serve the Mariners, considering these guys aren't making anything. It's financially beneficial for them. So I can't see them signing a free agent bullpen arm for $6 million. It doesn't fit with what the Mariners do. Even if it makes sense, even if it actually makes very good sense, and Sewald actually makes a lot of sense, but I think that they're going to do what they've done best, which is take a reclamation project on. Trent Thornton was one of those guys as well too. So it's like the Mariners can get value.
Yeah, didn't really work exactly last year, with the exception of Colin Snyder, who really panned out.
Sure,
but we'll go into next. So Pete Alonso and Alex Bregman, they are still to this day on the market. They should have been signed last month, but it looks like, I guess, MLB teams are seeing the red flags of taking on someone that's 30 plus years old with Scott Boras clients. And right now, Alonso, I guess the pitfalls on Alonso is his bat may not be there as much as it used to. His defense isn't exactly good. So maybe he isn't as good as what I guess Alonso and Scott Boras are demanding. Bregman might have the same problems. He is starting to get there into that age. But I would say that there was at least an Astro fan. He actually brought up this fact. His name is Astros Josh, so I'll give him a shout out for it. He's around
who that guy is.
Yeah, he's around a 5,000 followed guy, but he did say this, and I thought it was an excellent point. Obviously, Alex Bregman signing with the Seattle Mariners would be a nightmare scenario for Astro fans, with one of our franchise favorites going to the division rival. Absolutely, which is why I would love that. There has been zero reporting the Mariners are interested in Bregman, but that's what's absurd. The Mariners should be interested more than anyone. I agree, because they don't have a third baseman. They haven't won a playoff series in almost 25 years.
Right.
They haven't won in 25 years. I was 9 years old. They have a top 5 rotation, great bullpen, good outfield. Their payroll 2025 is only of 159 million, 31 less of their 2023 high of 190. And they have a dire need of a third baseman that can contribute offensively. Sure, a 6 to 7 year commitment to Bregman may carry some risk. His walk rate dropped past season, which is worrisome. Oh yeah, Scott Service would love that kind of guy, a guy who can't walk anymore. But the Mariners window with this rotation, it will close in the next 2 to 3 years, which is exactly what I'm thinking, with Gilbert and Kirby coming free agents. Bregman is worth the risk to potentially end their playoff series drought. That rotation could carry a team to the World Series. To be clear, I'm not rooting for this to happen as an Astros fan, but as a baseball fan, I'm baffled the Mariners haven't at least been more connected to Bregman.
First and foremost, Astros Josh, you're 100% correct. I know who that is, and he always makes sense 100%. I would like to think that the Mariners are interested. The only thing that they're not interested in is long-term deals, and of course, that's never been the Mariners' MO. When it comes to free agency, they more likely err on the side of caution with pitchers instead of position players. They would rather trade for club control. So there's that. All I'll say is this: Alex Bregman right now is a better fit for the Mariners than Pete Alonso, because they do have Luke Raley who can play first base, and depending on the way that they play this out, I think they're probably comfortable with that, right? The problem is Bregman is 30 years old, and they don't want to give a 5-year contract to a 30-year-old, right? They just don't want that type of overhead on their balance sheet, right? The question is would Bregman sign for 3 years, right? Could you, or could it be like a 4-year deal with an out after 2? The problem these players are finding out right now is over the course of the last 5 years, the market shifted where the big money are going to players that are under 30, from like that 25 to 28 age range. You saw that with Machado. You saw that with Soto, and you saw that with a lot of these guys who were in that age range, because they know at least if you're going to give a 10-year contract out, you're going to get at least 5 years of good return off of it, maybe even 6. So you're willing to eat the last couple of years of that deal, and maybe there's outs where you don't even have to worry about that. And that is the problem with the Seattle Mariners right now, is they don't I'm sure they would love to have Alex Bregman. I'm sure they would love it. But the question is dollars and cents, and also years, right? And I would probably assume that you're dealing with a guy like Scott Boras, who, obviously wants to get the best for all of his clients. The problem is we saw this last year and the year before, especially with guys like Blake Snell, guys like
Cody
Bellinger, Matt Chapman, that they were projected to have large contracts, and these negotiations went all the way into spring training. And what did they end up getting? 2-3-year deals. Blake Snell essentially only signed for a year. And it's because teams are looking at this and saying, you know what, I would rather trade a prospect or 2 for the upside of club control than hand a 30-year-old a 5-year deal. And so a lot of these agents are now trying to adjust to the market. And it's not just the Seattle Mariners that are playing the long game here. A lot of teams are doing this as well too, and they're just at best we'll give you a 3-year deal, and so they're going to take that and they're going to go shop it, and what they're getting back in return are identical deals, right? And so I look at this and I just say, if you're the Seattle Mariners, maybe you would be willing to go 4 years, which would push into 34, but you had a couple outs. After 2 years, you're going to be able to be a free agent in 2 years. And, we'll get you through the rest of your prime years, but we're not going to make a financial commitment in terms of years, because it's just not beneficial to the club. And you're going to be in the same division. You're going to be playing with a team that has better pitching. And you're going to be playing with Julio and Randy Arozarena. It's going to help us. But if you're asking me which one I would prefer, it would be Bregman, because I think it actually is a definite position of need. Whereas first base, again, we have Luke Raley, and it works. I would actually be okay with Raley. The problem with Pete Alonso, and this is the biggest problem that I've always had with Pete Alonso, is people love the long ball. People fall in love with it. And you look at his numbers, and he's 40 home run seasons, and all that's great, but you're also dealing with 200 plus strikeouts as well too. The dude is feast or famine. And we've had a good deal of that over the course of the last couple of years, right? High home run, high strikeout guys that don't do the little things to get on base when they're not hitting well. You know what I mean? And that's something that this team desperately needs. Guys who are willing to take a walk now and then, guys that if they're not seeing their pitch, that are going to be able to figure out a way to get on base outside of it. And the problem with Pete Alonso is okay, great. Yeah, he might hit you 30 home runs. All that's great, but he's going to be carrying a 230 average in Seattle.
200 plus. 230 sounds actually pretty good in Seattle.
Right. But you get what I'm saying. It's you're going to be carrying maybe on a good year, you're going to be carrying a 230 average, and you're going to be striking out 225 times a year. And it's I don't need another Richie Sexton. So I'll just say that. Maybe Pete Alonso might be a little bit better than Richie Sexton, but you get what I'm saying. It's they're the same profile type hitter. It's he might hit 30 home runs, but he's also going to strike out a ton as well too. And that doesn't alleviate the pressure of on Julio's shoulders. You need another dude in there that's going to be willing to do the little things. I would love to have a Jose Altuve type player in this lineup.
That would work great. And I looked up Matt Chapman's contract. He signed a 6-year 151. He makes 25 a year. And knowing that Bregman thinks he's better.
But I think Chapman has outs in that deal.
I didn't see any outs in there. I didn't see any like kind of options or anything. Looks like they signed him straight up. But the problem, I mean, I agree. Like in a perfect world, I think the Mariners can try, or at least if we had a good ownership and someone that knows how to sell the ideas, Jerry Dipoto and Justin Hollander, I think it can happen. The problem is, though, if Chapman made $25 million, he's 32. Bregman's going to at least want a 30. And knowing the Mariners and their alleged budget, I have to call it alleged budget, they would have to trade Luis Castillo. But if it means to get Bregman, fine. Or John Stanton, look at your profits, $76 million in profit. You have room to get Alex Bregman on the team. So I would say take the risk, because like if you do like a short-term contract, I'll give you flexibility to re-sign the likes of Logan Gilbert, George Kirby, Cal Raleigh, because the last thing we want is to lose those guys. And then if we lose those guys, then we'll have to completely blow it up again, which honestly, I'm done with this whole blowing it up and reloading again. Like 2019, I tolerated it because I was like, fine. But this time I'm like, no, I want to win now. I'm tired of this whole, oh, at least we did it in 95. Hey, remember Ichiro did this? Well, think about the Generation Zs. They don't care. Anyone born after 95, they don't care. I was born in 92 and I don't care because I was barely alive.
But it's different, right? Like, because in 2018, 2019, Jerry Dipoto was hired to try to get, the Canoes and the Cruzes and the Kyle Seagers and the Felix Hernandez in the playoffs. They got close a couple times, couldn't do it. But really what this team needed to be torn down to the studs and be rebuilt. And I was 100% on board with it too. And, and it was funny because 2 years later, this team won 91 games, right? So the rebuild happened quicker. And I think that put pressure on Jerry Dipoto because I don't think he was expecting to compete within that time frame. I think he was thinking it was going to be like around year 3, possibly year 4, that this team would be pushing 90 wins, right? But it happened like 2 years later. And then he was put in a position where now you have a lot of prospects. And, I thought the business that he did with getting Winker and Eugenio was a good piece of business. He shifted guys that didn't have a future. And now because they broke it, it almost seemed like that was something where it's like, okay, cool, the pressure's off. Now we can continue with this rebuild as a playoff appearance never even happened. That's the impression that I got. It's like, okay, cool. They gave the fans what they wanted, which was a taste of the playoffs. The problem is the pressure's still there. If you're not going to be active, right? If you're not going to show ambition, which is to get into the playoffs and be a World Series contender, then I would blow it up. Because if you're not going to it's so rare that we have a rotation this good, which can keep you in a ball game every 5 days and put you in a position where you can win. But if you're not going to build, and I'm not like building doesn't mean like the AJ Pollocks of the world and
Cooper Hummel,
the Cooper Hummels or the Victor Robles of the world. Yeah, like that's not building around Julio. That's like short-term stopgap because you don't want to spend money because you're afraid. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
like that's really
1 year, $8 million for AJ Pollock wasn't a problem.
Right. So I mean, or the 2 year, $24 million for Mitch Garver. It's like that's not building. That's it's just not. And so if you're not going to show ambition and really do your best, and that's the thing. And I get back to this again. It's like if you're saying that you're a draft, develop, and trade team, then trade. You know what I mean? Trade for club control. If that's what you want to do, then do it. You know, and bring in the players that are necessary to fill these positions long term, and then just let it ride and let some of these youngsters grow. But that being said, they're not even doing that. So if you're like, if you're not willing to do it, fine, then go ahead and sell high on Logan Gilbert, sell high on George Kirby and Cal Raleigh, and then just reload and try it again. You know what I mean? Because at least you're going to give yourself better flexibility payroll wise. So you actually might have a shot at signing a free agency without telling the world you only have $15 million of available budget
which is actually embarrassing.
Right. But it's complete BS. But I mean, whatever. It's like, come on, that's the frustrating part is there's zero ambition on the part of this franchise. That's the frustrating part.
It really is. It's like, what are they even doing kind of thing?
Yeah.
Now there's
nothing.
Yeah. Well, there's
nothing.
Now I want to go over the next two options. Possibly. I don't know if they're going to do it, but it's like, what the heck? Vlad Guerrero Jr. and Bo Bichette. The Blue Jays are in complete disarray. It's pretty sad because I remember in 21, at the end of the 21 season, Vlad Guerrero Jr. said this was just the movie trailer. 2022 is going to be a very awesome thriller movie. And guess who ended that thrilling movie? Guess who cut that movie short? The 2022 Seattle Mariners with that, it was like that 8-1 lead, the most insane comeback that I think we've ever seen in a playoff game history for the Seattle Mariners. And since then, they've been off. Like at least 23 they made the playoffs, but then 24 was a complete opposite. And now Vlad Guerrero Jr. entering his last year of his contract, and I believe Bo Bichette is as well, which means that they could be on the market. And again, knowing that how much the Mariners have in prospects, there's no question I think the Mariners should give it a shot. Like Bo Bichette, he's not a free agent until 26. Now, granted, his contract, his salary is projected to be $17 million, and Vlad Guerrero Jr. is probably going to be a lot north of that. But with the prospects that Mariners have, why not? It's like, why not give it a chance?
I think for Bo Bichette, I think JP Crawford's only making like 10. And
10 or 12, I think, yeah.
Yeah, 10 or 12. And I think Bichette's making 17. And the problem is you already have a guy at shortstop. And so if you bring in another shortstop, would you have to move JP to second base, or does Bo play second base? So then you have that issue. Obviously the obvious one would be Vlad Guerrero Jr. But the question that you have to ask yourself is the juice worth a squeeze for a guy like Vlad Jr.? Bringing him in, and the prospect capital that you're going to have to pay out only for him to be around for a year. Now, if this was like a sign and trade type of thing where you negotiating something long term, where you at least have them around for, I don't know, 4, 5, 6 more years, maybe that might be something. But that being said, it's like, are the Mariners prepared to pay the prospect package in order to get a guy for 1 year? Now, granted, Vlad Guerrero Jr. does exactly what you hope for, right? Which is bring in a guy that has 30 home run potential. He's a left-handed bat pull hitter in a park that plays well for left-handed hitters. But that being said, and he also would easily take pressure off of Rosarena and Julio Rodriguez, and that's exactly what you kind of want in this lineup. He's the big bat that you kind of need right in the middle of your lineup. But let me ask you. So let's say the Mariners traded for Vlad Guerrero Jr. tomorrow. Does that drastically change this team right now?
I'm still going to say, where's our third baseman?
Right. Where's our second baseman?
Where's our second baseman, third baseman, which is why we can agree that Alex Bregman would be the best fit out of all of them. And for Bo Bichette, I would say I think the Mariners can get a better deal out of him because right now he sucks. Like, he had a horrible 2024 season.
Yep.
And
yep.
I think the Mariners can. I think fit-wise it can work, but of course there's that whole who is going to be willing to play third and second base. But I think at this point, for the sake of winning, they got to work it out, because I don't like the idea that we're putting JP Crawford on a pedestal for shortstop, because he hasn't done anything since 2023, and that's when he had that lucky drive line season, and now I'm starting to think it was roids at this point.
Well, I think JP had a career year where he would manage to stay healthy. 2024 was a season where he just couldn't. So my biggest problem with a guy like Bo Bichette is that the Mariners have tried that bounce back. They'll trade for a guy who historically has been very good, but's coming off a bad year in hopes of a change of scenery and a bounce back season. It just didn't work. For whatever reason, it didn't work. Now, the cool part about a guy like Bo Bichette is he's a shortstop, right? Shortstop has historically have been like the position on the baseball diamond that requires the most athletic players. So theoretically speaking, he can transition to a different position. And it's not going to be that big of an issue because he's athletic. And Bo Bichette, I think defensively is pretty good. The idea of him moving to third wouldn't be that horrible. The question is, does his bat translate to Seattle? That's number one. And number two, again, prospect package for a dude that's got 1 year left and you're making him switch positions, right? Is that juice going to be worth the squeeze, right? I would like to think that Vlad Jr. is a safer bet. I know that he didn't start off 2024 the greatest, but he actually, in the second half of the season, he actually played really well. And so, that even if he gets off to a slow start, because the Mariners typically get off to slow starts, that he'll figure it out and, be the guy that we trade for. So like, if you're asking me like which player that I would send prospects to Toronto for, would be Vlad Jr. But then you're also asking whether or not the Mariners are going to be able to take on $20 million of payroll this year. And if you do that, does that allow you to bring in a guy like Bregman? See, trading a guy like Luis Castillo and his $24 million, what that does is it allows you to plug and play a guy like Emerson Hancock, who's I don't even think he's making $1 million. Because he's still club control tied, and you take that $24 million off your books, and that allows you to bring in a guy like Bregman. It's obviously robbing Peter to pay Paul, but that being said, you fill a position in need, and you're not necessarily hurting your rotation.
Yeah, but the problem is we all know the cycle that typically when the Mariners trade away like high salary players, we always have that delusion of like, oh, are the Mariners in on something? Nope, they're not. They're just gonna.
You're right.
Like, I have a big fear that if they trade Castillo, they're gonna get absolutely nothing out of it, because they really did mess around that badly with Castillo's trade opportunities, which we'll go over in a moment. But I wanted to move on to another possible candidate for the Mariners. Now, I think there's been more mixed opinions about him, but now it's not the Luis Arraez from last year. It's a different Luis. I can't even say his name. Luis. I'm going to ask Google and see what she says, because I always want to check, because it's about credibility. But he was on the San Diego Padres. He had a career year. He had 200 hits. Let's see what they say. Arraez.
Luis Arraez?
Luis Arraez of San Diego. But we have our friends Marine Layer. They think it's risky because he is possibly a defensive liability, and his wins above replacement was only 1. But the thing is, he also hit like 300 something and hit 200 hits. And they were expressing their concerns that maybe T-Mobile Park could work against him. And I know there's that whole park factor, but if you're not expected to hit home runs, I don't think it should be a big deal. I don't think it was a park factor. I think it was the fact that the Mariners had Scott Service as their manager, which is why their offense was inferior.
Right. Well, okay. So I wanted Luis Arraez 2 years ago. And the thing about it is I don't care about, defense at second base. As a matter of fact, as long as you're like league average, I'm fine with it, right? Like, I don't need you to be a Gold Glover at second base, right? This isn't like the days like when Robbie Alomar was in his prime, and I salivated for an opportunity to have that dude, or Brett Boone in his prime, where not only was he awesome offensively, but he was a Gold Glove caliber second baseman. But that being said, the Mariners still do employ Perry Ellis as an infield coach, so it's not out of the realm of possibility that getting a guy like Luis Arraez, that a guy like Perry Ellis is going to be able to help him be a little bit more competent. I mean, we're talking about the guy that turned J.P. Crawford into a Gold Glover, right? So it's like the dude can't help. But Luis Arraez, by the way, is almost like the best pure hitter in baseball right now. When he came up with Minnesota in 2019, he hit 334 with an OBP of 399. Okay. Like, he doesn't slug a lot because he's not a home run hitter, right? I think the best year was 2023, where he had 10 home runs and 69 RBIs, but he walks, he steals bases. And that year, by the way, in 2023, he hit 354 with a 393 OBP. His OPS was 861 and an OPS plus of 128. Last year, he split between two teams. He started with Miami and then was in San Diego. But still, I think he only played 117 games in 117 games with San Diego. Still managed to hit 318 with a 346 OBP. His slugging numbers were down, but that being said, the dude hits the ball and he gets on base, right? Like, at the top of the lineup? What do the Mariners desperately need at the top of their lineup, right? Because if J.P. Crawford, if that dude is not going well, it literally the Mariners start off with out, and then Julio Rodriguez, and then the inning is over, right? They're very, very rarely do the Mariners have a guy that is a table setter at the top of the lineup, right? That the idea was in 2023 when J.P. Crawford was going well, and he was on base, it helped the team out a lot. Getting a guy like Luis Arraez, not only is he a guy who is a good bad ball hitter, right? Like, he really is a very competent guy who can still make good contact on pitches that are up and out of the zone. He's like a miniature version of prime Vlad Guerrero without the power. Like, the dude can just hit bad balls. So he's almost like that whole Vlad Guerrero Ichiro thing, where he just has a good hitting eye, but he also takes walks. He will also work counts, and he's not afraid to draw a walk if his pitch isn't there. But that dude, like Luis Arraez, is a singles and doubles machine. Like, that is what this lineup absolutely needs. Somebody who is going to carry a 350 OBP. Somebody who's just is going to get on base, right? And that's, being able to extend innings, having a guy like that, who's in the seventh inning and your lineup is turning over and you have 9-1-2 and Luis Arraez is there. It's like having a guy that's going to be able to extend an inning is worth his weight in gold. I wanted him 2 years ago. That would have solved our second base issues for the next 5 years. Right? Luis Arraez is a legit all-star. I don't care what happened last year, because he split his games between two teams, and he had to move from Miami to San Diego. So yeah, that's going to affect players on some level, but he still managed to finish a very good season. I thought it wasn't up to his standards, but that being said, I would probably assume that next year he's going to be in the 330 range and a 380 OBP. And it's whatever, man. Marine Layer podcast, they're worried about his defense. It's sometimes it's worth settling for league average defense to have a dude that can just get on base at will. You know what I mean? Luis Arraez is he's an on base machine, right? That's something that I would love to have in the 2-hole in this lineup, without a doubt.
And we should, us Seattle fans, we should really stop with this whole T-Mobile Park thing. It's not about T-Mobile Park. It's about who's running the team, who's coaching.
Right.
And there's just so many things they come up with. They're like, well, Seattle's just too far away from everything, or Seattle, I don't know, T-Mobile Park, it's hard to hit home runs, or we're cursed. It's no, there's no curse. There is no, our market stinks and we're too far away. I think that's an excuse. And there's none of this curse thing. It's just about who is running the show. Like, look at the Seahawks. When they were making that Super Bowl run in 2013 to 14, they had no problems getting Michael Bennett and Cliff Averill on the team, and they were highly free agent guys. Like, the Seahawks don't use that excuse, but we see the Mariners and we see these fans making all of these excuses for this team for the last 25 years, and we're saying, oh, it's T-Mobile Park's fault. But again, we've had players that worked. Edgar Martinez worked. Ichiro worked. Brett Boone, who came out of nowhere, he left Qualcomm Stadium, which I think was more hitter-friendly, went to a pitcher-friendly stadium, and still hit 37 home runs. So I'm tired of T-Mobile. Now, granted, these are like generational type guys, but the thing is, Seth Smith, he's not even that great of a player, and he loved hitting at T-Mobile. He was great at T-Mobile, so that's why.
I remember when Seth Smith came, because he was that guy who he was. I guess I would call him Luis Arraez light, right? Where he was a walks guy, he was a singles and doubles guy. Occasionally popped out a dinger, but he was a table setter, right? Like it's funny. It's funny the excuses though, and I got a good story for this too. Do you know the name Fred Hutchinson? He's a Seattle baseball icon. As a matter of fact, there's a cancer research center in Seattle right off of I-5. That bears his name. He was born in Rainier Beach, I think in 1919. Was a member of the great Seattle Rainiers of the late 30s, early 40s before moving on to the major leagues. I think he became a manager in 1952, and then in 1955, after he was done managing the Detroit Tigers, he came back to Seattle to manage in 1955, and this is a great story. He comes in, and this was his managerial philosophy. In spring training, he looks at his team, which was a mix of veteran and also youth, because the Seattle Rainiers, after that run in the late 30s and 40s, they kind of tailed off at the end of 40s after World War II, and then they struggled a little bit in the early 50s. Fred Hutchinson comes back and says, listen, man, he says, all I ask you, and this is good, this is the definition of great leadership. He says, man, all I simply ask you is to show up on time and play hard for 9 innings, and we're not going to have any issues, right? It was not about balls and strikes. It wasn't about launch angles. It wasn't about any of that crap. Show up to the park, play hard, and we're going to be just fine. Like that type of atmosphere where everybody knows where they stand, what's expected, and you're going to get good results. Because players are not going to worry about whether or not, if they struggle a little bit, they're not going to have to worry, because your coach shows extreme trust. That is the what I'm looking like. I know we were just talking about Luis Arraez and Seth Smith. I understand that, but I mean, any player that you bring in has to come into an environment that fosters a mentality where players understand exactly where they stand and what's expected. And that's something that I don't think this team has had. Even in 2022, when we were, got to the playoffs, I still think that I just think that team came together, was galvanized by a fight. And I think they banded together because of it, and they were able to do something great. But I just think that, one of the things that I think Dan Wilson has to do is revert back to the Lou Piniella days, where that was exactly the mentality. Everybody came in understanding exactly what their role was. There can't be any miscommunication. It's like, I know we're talking about fits for this team, but the biggest fit has to be the mentality of the manager and his relation to these ball players and the expectations. That story just came to my mind, and I think 2025 starts with Dan Wilson. It starts and ends with Dan Wilson and his ability not only to relate to his players, but also how he handles these players. Is he going to be a watchdog? Is he going to be a micromanager? Or is he just going to be like, listen, all I ask for you is just to come to the ballpark and play hard. If you do that, we're good.
Yeah, no overthinking, no numbers geeking, and no distractions. Like, don't go on Twitter and say that, oh yeah, T-Mobile
Because
Park is the problem.
Because we've seen, right, and that's what I'm getting at, right? The built-in excuses that are absolute horseshit, right? Because we've seen teams that did not have the greatest talent of the world get to the playoffs. We've seen that before. The Oakland A's of the 2000s that had some very good young talent, but they were very much inexperienced and were able to play over their heads because they had a guy in place who literally just was like, come to the ballpark, play hard, we're good.
Art Howell.
Yeah, Art Howell. And it's like, that's the like the Mariners right now, it's an incomplete team 100%. And I don't think you and I will disagree with that, but it's also possible that this team can, starting day one in spring training, if Dan Wilson plays it right and sticks to it, and just understand that if you strike out whatever, you have another at bat. If you're going through a down cycle where you're in a little slump, come to me. We'll talk about it. But at the same time, you're going to be in the lineup unless you're a distraction. You know what I mean? But it starts and ends with Dan Wilson. There are no excuses. And this team, depending on the culture, the atmosphere in which he manages, this team with this pitching still could actually potentially have a very good year, regardless of what Houston does, regardless of what the Sacramento A's. It's still weird calling them the Sacramento A's or the LA Angels. It doesn't matter. What matters is your approach to the game and the direction. If Dan Wilson can get them going in the same direction together, this team has the potential of doing something amazing, regardless of whatever players come in. I just think that, when you look at the history of this game, and there have been instances where teams that did not have the top end talent still went on to have great seasons. I still think with this pitching, the Mariners potentially could be that. But that being said, under Scott Service, I think Scott Service prioritized certain players over others. And I think his managerial style, I always thought that Scott Service was kind of passive aggressive. And I don't necessarily think that he had backs of certain players. And I think that reflected in 2023 and 2024. So I'm looking forward to 2025 just from the Dan Wilson angle. I think he has the potential to be a very good manager. It just depends on the atmosphere he creates. If it's loose, if it's fun, if the players come to the ballpark with the idea that it's going to be fun to be there, they're going to play amazing. I just think the last couple of years, these guys have come to the ballpark understanding that it's a job. And nobody likes going to work.
And we saw that in the Dodgers games where we saw that team just looked completely lost. Like even like the Mojos, the Marine Layers, they were like championing for Scott Service. Now, respect to the opinion, sure. But even they finally cracked and go, okay, Scott Service has got to go. But they pretty much said it. But the crazy thing is, I was saying it after 2018 because I was like, well, if he couldn't break 90 wins with that core that he had, how is he going to do it with anything else? Which he kind of did. But the teams that Scott Service had from 22 to 24, that should have been at least a 95 win team. At least 23 should have at least cracked 90.
The wild thing was in 2022, like in 2023, the Mariners fell apart in September. Because they didn't have that leadership that they had the year before. And I'm talking about the Carlos Santanas of the world, guys that had that thing where they could bring guys in a direction and rally around. They didn't have it in 2023. They fell apart. Last year, the idea was like Justin Turner might be that guy, and it just didn't work out. I do think that leadership matters, which is the Mitch Hanagers of the world, which I think will play a role clubhouse wise. But that being said, I just think that, I think you're right. For me, it's the idea that you have this built-in excuse is just ridiculous to me, where it's like, oh, well, the ballpark. It's like, well, what do you mean the ballpark? Like, Ichiro didn't have a problem at T-Mobile Park. Brett Boone never had an issue. John Allred never had an
Cruz,
issue. No, never
Mike
had an
Cameron.
issue. Mike Cameron had
career years in T-Mobile Park.
Yeah. By the way, Brett Boone Richie Sexton for a couple of years, Adrian Beltre, Kyle Seager. And it's like, no,
Raul
dude,
Ibanez.
Raul Ibanez. And it's like, dude, there have been Russell Branyan for like a year and a half. And it's like, there have been, by the way, I'm still a huge Russell Branyan guy, but
the muscle.
There have been the muscle mania. There's been countless examples of players that have been able to perform. It's like, I just think there was a culture issue and an environmental issue where it just wasn't fun for players to come to the ballpark. And that's the thing. It's like, it's funny because when you look at the Dodgers and when you look at some of these teams, it's like, yeah, of course, they have upper echelon talent. That helps. But they always look like they were having fun in the dugout. You know what I mean? Where you looked at the Mariners side, and you can see that they were struggling. You can see that they were pressing. They looked stressed out. You know what I mean? And like, that's the thing. It's like you lean on your leadership, you lean on your manager to help you get through those periods. And it just didn't look like they were having fun. And there were points last year where the Mariners couldn't stop the bleeding. Regardless of what buttons they tried to push, nothing seemed to work. And it is what it is. He lost his job. Okay, great. And then all of a sudden, when Dan Wilson comes in, all of a sudden they play better. Same team, played better.
21-13. Although it was too little, too late, and there were some games they should have won. I mean, it was still
talent plays a role. Yeah, talent plays a role, right? So they got that manager bounce. So I like Dan Wilson, and I think it starts with him. Would I like to see some more talent? Of course. But if you're not going to do it, then play the youngsters. You know what I mean? Like, don't be afraid to play them. Like, if you're not going to go out there, like if you're not going to swing a trade for club control, like a Lars Nootbaar to come in and play second, you get what I'm saying? Like, if you're not going to swing a trade for club control and you want to keep your prospects, fine. But that being said, then play them, right? Do we have a third baseman ready to come in and play? Or is that going to be, are you going to give home dude a shot at second base and then you're going to move Cole Young to third base? You know what I mean? It's like, is there somebody ready to come up and play that right now? You still have, I think you still have, what's his face?
Cole Emerson. Well, he's a bit young though.
They still have, I still think they have Leo Rivas in the system.
Oh yeah, Leo Rivas. Yeah.
Yeah, you get what I'm saying. Like it's not ideal. They have Dylan Moore if they want to roll Dylan Moore at third base or second base, whatever the case may be. Like, my whole thing is, it's like, if you're not gonna be ambitious, okay, fine. Then fill those with prospects, man. Fill them with prospects and let them cut their teeth. And who knows, maybe something will happen.
Could have another Julio year out of Cole Young. Never know.
You never know.
Doesn't do any good to just sit him there, especially if he's at Double-A. And let me see how Cole Young did, and then we'll get to our final segment, which is about the Luis Castillo trade disaster and whatnot. Cole Young stats, who I really do like. I do think highly of Cole Young. He is one of the favorite prospects. Cole Young in Arkansas batted .271 with a .369 OBP. He does strike out a lot still, 87 and 124. But he makes it up with 67 walks, can steal bases, can drive in runs, 57 RBIs in 124 games, 25 doubles. Yeah, maybe he's probably going to start. I mean, it depends how he does in spring training. I would say worst case, he's here by June, but best case, he could be there for opening lineup. But if he does like any level of like Julio did, or even just slightly below Julio's level in spring training of 22, he should be he should get a call up, because I don't think anyone's going to be sold on the idea that Dylan Moore is going to be an everyday player. Everyone should know that he is not an everyday. He fits in that role of like the Mark McLemores and the Rich Amaral. He is more of that kind of player. He is not an everyday player.
Right. They also still have Samad Taylor, who I believe can play second base as well too. Which is also kind of interesting as well. I think a lot of people think Samad is more of a infielder, outfielder type of 25, 26 man on on your roster type of guy, but he's also available. The thing I like about Cole Young is the fact that he's a shortstop. So again, athlete, he can switch positions. So it's not out of the realm of possibility. Maybe he's even working on it down in Arizona right now. So I would actually be okay with that. I don't think I would have a problem rolling out prospects. Although the interesting thing is for me is Ryan Bliss. You know, like
he is second
Ryan
base
Bliss,
option right now.
Right. My question to you is, and I'm curious about how you feel about this. Do you think Ryan Bliss can be an everyday player, at least to the deadline? Like if you wanted to platoon it with a guy like Dylan Moore and Samad Taylor, you know what I mean?
I need to see how he does in spring training, even though that spring training doesn't really amount to anything because a lot of the pitchers you're playing against are going to be bagging groceries in a couple of weeks, like what the great Lou Brown said of the Cleveland Indians in Major League.
Sure.
But considering what they
will
have,
be bagging groceries in a few weeks.
Yeah, but he's got some power. But I don't know. Like we didn't really get a good sample size because Jorge Polanco took all those bats. But there were times where he did contribute very well, and I think he did. He was not at least he wasn't disaster. So I would be open to it. Now, if the Mariners were in a complete rebuild mode, I'd be like, yeah, give them all 162 games. But because we're in contention, there's like, well, we should try to see if we can get Alex Bregman.
Are we though? Are we in contention? I mean,
I
realize that we have the best rotation in baseball. But my question to you is though, and I think I said this earlier, right? So I think Jerry DePoto was surprised that we won 91 games in 2021. I don't think he was expecting it, right? As a matter of fact, going to that season, I think he was quoted as saying if we can be at the 500 mark around the All-Star break, that'll be a good season. I don't think he was expecting it, and they played well above their
heads,
right? And I think, and then they got the playoff drought over, but I still think in my mind that he's still in that rebuilding mindset, that he's still rebuilding this club. I don't think Jerry DePoto is in that we're a contender mindset. I think he's still thinking that we're still in this rebuild